knows it, everyone reads it. That's the way it is. Surat Yaseen, I just told you, is not short. It's 83 ayat. It's longer than a quarter of a juz. It's longer than a quarter of a juz. So why is it so popular? And that's a lot of Quran to memorize, a quarter of a juz.
That's more than 2.
Right? Sometimes that's the most Quran people know, is that quarter of Surat Yaseen, and they don't even know another quarter put together. Why is it so popular? There's no logical explanation. I was just sharing with the students on Thursday in class that what else could be a reason why a surah would be very, very well known, well recited, easy to memorize, very popular. Maybe it'd have a lot of repetition in it. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Right? That makes it easy to memorize. That makes it kind of like, you just feel inclined towards memorizing. It's kind of cool. Has got all this repetition in it. Surat Yaseen has no repetition. There's like half of an ayah that repeats itself. And one of our students who's a hafiz was actually saying that actually makes it more confusing to memorize. Right? So it's not repetition. Sometimes it's got like a rhyming scheme to it. A rhyming scheme, right? وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا. Right? Rhyming scheme. That's like, oh, kind of cool. Surat Yaseen has no rhyming scheme. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم. Okay, it's rhyming so far. لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. There's no rhyming scheme in Surat Yaseen. So there's no rhyming scheme to it. Maybe sometimes something is very exciting or easy to memorize because it's got short ayat. وَنَازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Right? These short, quick hit ayat. Surat Yaseen, سُبْحَانَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْأَزْوَاجَ كُلَّهَا مِمَّا تُنْبِتُ الْأَرْضُ وَمِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَمِمَّا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. That's one ayah. Right? So it's not short. What makes Surat Yaseen so popular? Logically, like from superficially, I should say, there's no reason why Surat Yaseen would be that popular. It's part of the miracle of this particular surah of the Quran. There's no superficial explanation for it. It just is. And the Prophet ﷺ was prophesying that. He was foretelling that when he said everything has a heart, and the heart of the Quran is Yaseen. Because hearts connect to hearts, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ was very prophetically, very eloquently trying to say that Surat Yaseen will be something that will always be very near and dear to the hearts of people. And that's why people worldwide, I've met people who can't even read the Quran by looking in it. People who haven't even done their Nurani Qaida, like they can't even read the Quran by looking in it. But they have the whole Yaseen memorized. They have the whole Yaseen memorized. Right? Because the hearts will just naturally gravitate towards this particular surah. And so that's one of the virtues of this surah and part of the miracle of this surah. But again, that doesn't go without explanation. And of course, like I said in the first point, the reason why hearts gravitate towards this surah and are connected to this surah is because this surah addresses the hearts. It is the remedy of the heart. It teaches us what you believe, how to believe, why you believe what you believe. And that's why it finds a special place in the heart of believers worldwide. Alright, so that's a little bit of a brief introduction, as brief as I can make it, to this magnificent, beautiful surah, Surat Yaseen. By the way, I forgot to tell you all one thing. You know when you realize, how you realize how popular Surat Yaseen is? You know when and how you realize how popular Surat Yaseen is? As a young hafiz of the Quran, Sheikh Nadim's here, he can tell the stories as well. As a young hafiz of the Quran, the first time you lead Tarawih prayers, you realize how popular Surat Yaseen is. Okay, because this is what happens. The first time you lead Tarawih prayers, that Sheikh Nadim never had that problem. He's like a machine, mashallah. Alright, but we actually, I shouldn't even tell you people this. How many people are here from Epic itself? Okay, quite a few. It's okay, I'll tell you anyways. But when we were kids, like young Hafad and stuff, we used to call him the train. Because he was like a machine. He would just get going, he could just read. Right? Like you could wake him up in the middle of the night, ask him to read from anywhere, he can just read it. He just knows it, mashallah, tabarakallah. But, so, as a young hafiz of the Quran, a lot of times, your first time that you lead Tarawih prayers, it's like a crime scene, basically. Alright? It's very tragic. You make dozens of mistakes, right? You forget what rak'ah is, right? Like making mistakes is a normal thing. It's just It's what you do. It's more nerves than not knowing your Quran. We had very good teachers who made sure we know. Otherwise, this is nerves. You're like a 14-year-old kid standing in front with like, and usually you start off somewhere small. There's only like 10, 15, 20 people behind you. But it's nerve-wracking, right? And so you make a lot of mistakes. I remember there were some nights I'd be driving back home, right? My dad would drive me to the Masjid, the Khaliville area for Tarawih. Driving back home, I would look out the window the entire ride. I would just, passenger seat, I would just look out the window because I knew if I made eye contact with him, I would melt, right? Because I made so many mistakes that day that he was just glaring at me the whole way. He drove like this the whole way home. He didn't even look at the road. He just stared at me, waiting for me to make eye contact so I would melt, right? And so there were those types of nights. So you're reading in Surah Al-A'raf or Surah Al-Anfal or Surah Hud or Surah Al-Ra'd. You're reading from somewhere and you just crash. Right? You just crash, like you just go blank. You're reading, flowing, and then boom. It's like somebody turned off the lights, like somebody pulled the plug. You just go dead. You just go silent. Right? And you don't know where you stopped. You don't know where to start. You don't even remember what you were reading anymore. You just go blank. Right? It's the nerves. And you just freeze up and you just stop. Like hoping and praying somebody will correct you. How's somebody going to correct you? I'm talking about like the mid-90s, early 90s. There were no other huffaz in the community. That's why there's this 14-year-old kid leading. Right? So there's no other huffaz, so nobody can even correct you. So everyone's just standing there. And you're just standing there. And you're waiting for like divine revelation to come down, tell you where to read from again, or an angel's going to descend and tell you where to read from. That ain't gonna happen. It's not happening, right? And you stand there sometimes for like 2 minutes in dead silence. It's like such an awkward experience. I'm so glad nobody could record this stuff back in the day, because it'd be like 2 minutes of dead air. And eventually you remember you can go into ruku and you just go into ruku, right? And that's how you recover. And then you get to Surat Yaseen. This is what happens at night when you are a young hafid leading. And you've gotten used to this, right? For like 20 days, nobody's corrected you in anything. Like, nobody can help you pick up from where you left off. And you get to Surat Yaseen and you start reading that night. Yasin wal Qur'an al-Hakim innaka lamina al-mursaleen ala siratin mustaqim. And then you decide to take a breath. And the entire masjid yells at once, Tanzeel al-Aziz al-Rahim. All of a sudden, everyone's pitching in. It's a group effort, mashallah. Everyone pitches in together. There's sisters in the back of the masjid. There's little kids who are running around who will stop be like, Tanzeel al-Aziz al-Rahim. Right? Everybody knows Surat Yaseen. Everybody does. Right? And that's when you realize how popular it is. I remember thinking to myself, like, man, nobody knows anything from the Quran except for Surat Yaseen. And it's really remarkable. It's actually part of the miracle of the surah. So that's what we were basically talking about there. Now let's go ahead and get started with the actual surah, inshallah. We'll take a break in just a little bit. We'll kind of maybe get a little bit started, a couple of ayat into the surah, because the beginning part's going to require a little bit of explanation. So the first ayah of the Quran, the first ayah of this surah is Yaseen. Yaseen. This is what we call al-huruf al-muqatta'at. Al-huruf al-muqatta'at. Alright? Literally translated as the disjointed letters. Let me explain what that means, because that doesn't make a lot of sense either. Right? So that's the type of English only Muslims use. Right? Disjointed letters. That doesn't mean anything. Alright, so let me explain what that actually means. Normally in the script of the Arabic language, which is what the Quran is in, it's from the Arabic language. In the script of the Arabic language, whenever you have two letters written together, you read them, you join them. You read them together, you join them together. Okay? So when you see Ya and Sin written together, normally it would be read as Yas, Yis, or Yus. Right? That's how it would be read. Just like, take anything for example. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. You join it, you read it together. There are 29 places in the Quran where you do not do that. There are 29 places in the Quran where you do not do that. There are 29 places in the Quran, and they are all at the beginning of a surah. That's part of its special feature. It's at the beginning of a surah. So it's not confusing. 29 surahs, in their very beginning, you have letters that are written together, joined together, written together, but they are not read together. Rather, each letter's name is said separately and independently. So this is not read as Yes, Yis, or Yus. This is read as Ya, Sin. Alif, Lam, Mim, Ha, Mim. Alright, and there are 5 different combinations of this. Alright, of course there's 1 letter examples. Noon, Qaf, Sad. Alright, there are 2 letter combinations, Yaseen. 3 letter combinations, Alif, Lam, Mim. 4 letter combinations, Alif, Lam, Mim, Sad. And there are 5 letter combinations, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Sad. Alright, so there are all these different combinations. Now let's talk a little bit about what does it mean. Alright, what does it mean? And why? So first and foremost, a lot of times there are some obscure opinions, particularly about Yasin. There are some obscure opinions that this is the name of the Prophet ﷺ, or this is speaking about the Prophet ﷺ. None of those opinions are authentic and have not been accepted by the vast overwhelming majority of the scholars of the Quran as non-authentic position. The true understanding, the proper understanding of this, a lot of times people say it doesn't mean anything. That is also incorrect, because that's saying that something in the Quran doesn't have any meaning to it. That's level. That's impossible. The correct understanding of it is that we do not know what it means. Wallahu ta'ala a'lamu bi muradihi. Allah knows best what He intended by saying Yasin. We don't know what it means. Allah knows what it means. We don't know what it means. Alright? That's the proper understanding of this. Well, I have a follow-up question to that, as y'all should too. The follow-up question to that is, I understand Allah revealed Yasin. We don't know the meaning of it, okay? I'm with you there. But the follow-up question I have is, I thought the Quran was for reflection. Why would Allah send something in the Quran and then not tell us what it means? What do I learn from that? What do I reflect in terms of that? So this requires a little bit of an explanation. There are a couple of explanations for this. Number one is the aspect of humility, intellectual humility. See, the Quran is there for us to reflect on, to understand, to dig deeper, to continue to study entire lives. Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, in the Tafsir of an ayah in Surah Al-Imran, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ, he actually says that the Quran, the test of the Quran for the common person is to learn it, to study it, to not just simply say, oh, I don't know what it means. No, it's your job to know what it means. So if you're reading Alam Tara Kayfa Fa'ala Rabbuka bi Ashabil Fil for 10 years in your salah and somebody says, what does this surah mean? I don't know. That's not good enough. You have to know what it means. It's your job, it's your test with the Quran. Study it, understand what it means. But on the other hand, he says that the test for the scholar is that there are some places in the Quran where you get to and Allah tells you, you don't know what this means. And your job, because for the academic, for the intellectual, it's very difficult to hear the answer, no. Hearing the answer, just believe in this, just accept it. It's very difficult for a student, for an academic, for an intellectual. It's very difficult to hear the answer, you don't know what it means, but still believe it, still accept it. No, I mean, you've been trained. You spent the last 15, 20 years studying something, asking a question about every single little letter, every single little sound, why this, why that, what this, what's that. And then when you get to a place where it's told, just believe in it. That's very difficult. But that's intellectual humility. It humbles you. That I do not know what this means, but I will still believe in it. Yasin, I can't tell you what it means. Allah knows best, but I still believe in it as much as I believe in something I understand. I know I can translate. I cannot translate Yasin, but I will believe in it just as much as I believe in Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. There's no difference in my iman when it comes to these two ayahs. It's the same. So that's the first thing. Humble yourself. The Quran makes you humble yourself. And part of that point is also the reason why these letters occur in the beginning of surahs. It teaches us the etiquette of studying the Quran. The etiquette of studying the Quran. A lot of times when you start to pick up a Quran and you start studying it, you open up a surah and you start studying it, there's some stuff you already know. There's a certain amount of knowledge and information that you come to the table already with. There are some basic usul, some understandings you've already developed and you come to the table with those understandings. These 29 surahs that begin with these disjointed letters, they force you to start off by saying, I don't know what it means, but I still believe. And this teaches us the etiquette of studying the Quran. That part of the etiquette of studying the Quran is to say, I am here to learn. I do not know. I am leaving my preconceived notions and my assumptions at the door. I'm checking them at the door, and I am here to learn. And that's what's beautiful, that we get to study the surah here today, because mashallah, some of y'all might be very, very extremely knowledgeable about the Quran, very knowledgeable about the Arabic language, very knowledgeable about the usul of our deen and our religion. But the fact that we're studying Surat Yaseen, you and I, all of us, we all at the door have to check everything we think we know, and we have to sit down and start with Yaseen. Allah knows best. But I still believe. It forces you to say, I am here to learn. And the Quran in Surah Fussilat, Surah number 41 actually tells us, if somebody approaches the Quran with belief, with iman, with submission first, that Quran will be a guidance and a cure for that person. قُلْ هُوَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا هُدًى وَشِفَاءٌ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ فِي آذَانِهِمْ وَقْرٌ وَهُوَ عَلَيْهِمْ عَمًى. But the Quran says, if somebody approaches the Quran with preconceived ideas and notions, they will be deaf to the truth of the Quran, and they will be blind to the realities of the Quran. So it's very important to check your ego, if you want to call it that. It's very important to check it at the door, because when you sit in front of the Book of Allah, we sit as a blank page. We sit as a blank slate. I'm here to learn. I'm here for Allah, for God to tell me what to do. Not for me to tell God, I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with that. I'm here for Allah to tell me what's right and what's wrong. Not the other way around. So that's part of the benefit of this. Secondly, linguistically, there's a profound eloquence to using these letters. So remember when I told you when Surat Yaseen was revealed? And this, actually, some of the scholars say the second revelation of the Quran was Surah Qalam. Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. So those letters were there from the very beginning. Because what we know from studying the Quran and the life, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, is that the Quran was something they had no response for. They would personally attack the Prophet ﷺ, they would torture Muslims, they would do all this stuff, but that's why the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ was the Quran. He would just recite the Quran. When he would go out to the public and try to talk to the people, Ya ayyuhan nas, qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu. Oh people, say la ilaha illallah and you will be successful. And they would start shouting at him and yelling at him. The Prophet ﷺ would then just recite the Quran. He would just read and recite the Quran. And they had no response for it. They couldn't refute the Quran. And the Quran talks about this. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ يَثْنُونَ صُدُورَهُمْ لِيَسْتَخْفُوا مِنْهُ. So what they started doing was that they would fold their hands on their chest, they would plug their fingers in their ears, they would turn away their faces, they would begin to walk away, not to listen to the Quran, because they couldn't respond to it. It was too powerful. There was no responding, refuting the Quran. But that wasn't good enough, because other people would listen to it. So then they came up with a follow-up strategy. The follow-up strategy, which is in Surah 41, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَا تَسْمَعُوا لِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ وَالْغَوْا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَغْلِبُونَ. So their follow-up strategy was, listen, Abu Jahl and all of his cronies got together and they said, look, we don't listen to Muhammad when he reads. Fine. But all these other people do. And that's a problem. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this situation? So they said, here's the strategy. When Muhammad stands there and reads the Quran in public, start yelling and shouting over him. Start making so much noise that people physically can't hear him. Like yelling and screaming, yelling and shouting. Just cause a ruckus, cause a riot, so people can't hear. So they would start plugging their fingers in their ears, and they would start yelling and shouting so that nobody could hear what the Prophet ﷺ was reciting. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala countered this practice by sending the disjointed letters. See, because it was such a unique feature. And let me kind of demonstrate for you how it's really remarkable. So maybe you're listening. Let's just say, for example, while I'm talking here, you kind of stop paying attention and you pull out your phone and you start going through Facebook and you start trying to check out where everybody is and what they're doing and what they're eating and what they're drinking, right? So you become a little preoccupied with something else while I'm talking. Because I've been talking for almost an hour now, it starts to become a little monotonous after a while. You get used to the sound of my voice. And so you kind of lose your focus, lose your attention, and you pick up your phone. And you continue to hear my voice. So there's this comfort level that I am listening, right? But you're not really paying attention. So you're listening, and if I keep talking like this for another hour, you would just keep listening. But while I'm talking, while I'm speaking, if all of a sudden I said S-P-E-A-K, if I spelled out my word like that, what would you do? You'd leave your phone and you'd be like, oh my God, he's having a seizure. Right? Right? I mean, you would freak out. My point is, it would get your attention. Yes or no? It would get your attention. So the Prophet ﷺ is reciting the Quran, and these people are yelling and screaming, la 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 la, right? They're not listening. And all of a sudden the Prophet ﷺ says, Yaseen. See what happened? Everything stops. Even the kid in the back, he stopped. He's kind of like, what? Right? That's because his name's Yaseen, but that's different. So, but everybody just stops and freezes. Right? I always talk about this. Very fascinating. Very fascinating. You know, unfortunately, I don't say this, you know, with any pleasure. Unfortunately, a lot of people who come to the masjid and pray don't understand what's being recited within the prayer, right? And that leads to a lot of like absence, a lack of khushu' within the prayer, right? So you stand and you come and you stand, mashallah, at least you came to the masjid, but you come and you stand up, Allahu Akbar, and the Imam's like, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Maliki, Yawmi, and he's reading, and you're just kind of like, and then you're thinking about everything else, like, what are you going to eat, and, you know, where are you going to go, and what do you have to do, and is your phone vibrating, or is it not, right? So you're just kind of disconnected, you're all over the place. And then after he says, وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ آمِينَ, in the first rak'ah, he read from somewhere, آمَنَ الرَّسُولُ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. You weren't really paying attention. And you get it for the second rak'ah, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, and again, you're just not really paying attention. And then as soon as he says, وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ آمِينَ, then he says, كَافْ Ha ya ayn sad. What happens? You perk up, right? You're kind of like, what? Who? Huh? Very nice. Right? It catches your attention, at least for a second. Then he says, ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبْدَهُ زَكَرِيَّا, then you're back like, right? But, for a second there he had you. Right? That's the power of the al-huruf al-muqatta'at. That's the power of it. It grabs your attention. Because it is very unique. Nobody but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks like that. So it does grab your attention. So it is an attention grabber. Purely linguistically, it is an attention getter, an attention grabber. Alright? And then not by coincidence, majority of the places where these disjointed letters occur, what is the very next thing it talks about after the letters? Right, very good. Alif Lam Mim Dhalikal Kitabu. Yaseen wal Quran al-Hakim. Sad wal Quran al-Dhikr. Qaf wal Quran al-Majid. Hamim wal Kitab al-Mubin. Alif Lam Ra tilka ayatul Kitab al-Mubin. Right? It talks about the Quran. Because the second the Prophet ﷺ said Alif Lam Mim, and everyone's like this. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. Dang it, you got us again. Right? So that's what it was. It's a very practical attention getter. And that's part of the eloquence and the beauty of these disjointed letters within the Quran. Alright? So that's kind of a little bit of a discussion about Yaseen, and I guess what it means and how we understand it and how we benefit from it. So Yaseen. The next thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as I just explained to you, وَالْقُرْآنِ الْحَكِيمِ. وَالْقُرْآنِ الْحَكِيمِ. This is an oath. This is an oath. Allah is swearing by the Quran. وَالْقُرْآنِ الْحَكِيمِ. By the wise Quran. The Quran that is full of wisdom and authoritative. Alright? I'll explain this in just a second. So this is an oath. First thing about an oath is that every oath, the basic elementary, most basic purpose of taking an oath linguistically is to do what? At a very, very basic level, it is to emphasize something. It is to get somebody's attention. It is to prove a point to someone. It is to prove a point to someone. And something that we're going to talk about in the next ayah, but I'll go ahead and start the conversation now. Whenever you take an oath to try to leverage the credibility of what you are taking an oath by. Okay? So I'm doing business with you. You don't believe me. I'm telling you, I bought this for $10. I'm selling you this, I'm asking for 15, and you're like, why are you ripping me off? I'm like, no brother, I paid $10 for this, that's why I'm asking for 15. And you're like, no, I don't believe you. So what does somebody say in that situation?
Wallahi.
Wallahi, right? Wallahi, I swear by Allah. What's the purpose of that oath? I am leveraging the respect and the credibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name has with you to say that if you respect Allah and you believe in Allah and you trust Allah, I am asking you to believe me, to trust me, to respect me, and that I am telling you the truth. Just like God has told you the truth. You leverage the credibility of one thing for something else, less credible when you take an oath. So Allah is leveraging the credibility, the respect, the acceptance of the Quran amongst the people. What a Quran al-Hakim. So He swears by the Quran, by the wise Quran. The word that Allah uses is Hakim. Hakim, the word Hakim comes from Hikmah and Hukum. It comes from both roots. Hikmah means wisdom. Hukum means authority. So the word Hakim actually has both meanings. Something that is wise and something or someone that is authoritative. But they're actually connected. Because originally the way it's supposed to be is authority is given to someone who has wisdom. Authority is meant to be given to the wise. So it's saying the wise Quran and that Quran that is authoritative. And this, by the way, is the greatest miracle of the Quran. You know, the Quran has many miraculous aspects to it. Its language, the historicity, the historical accuracy of the Quran, the word I'm looking for is, I guess, the cohesion, the consistency, the continuity of the Quran, the coherence of the Quran, that's the word I'm looking for. The coherence of the Quran, the scientific, miracles that are shared within the Quran, etc., etc. The Quran has many miraculous aspects to it. But the greatest miracle of the Quran is the wisdom of the Quran. The Quran solves problems. That's it. And actually, I find it quite tragic, and I try to communicate this to our students. When students become very heavily inclined towards one particular aspect of Quranic study, like they study the language of the Quran and they become very obsessed about the linguistic miracle of the Quran, they can sometimes forget actually that the Quran is actually a solution to your problems. The Quran solves your problems. If somebody obsesses about science in the Quran, you can actually forget that the Quran still tells you how to solve your daily life and problems. That's the greatest miracle of the Quran. That you just lived and understood and implemented the Quran in your daily life as a father, as a mother, husband, wife, brother, sister, employee, boss, neighbor, friend. The Quran teaches you how to live your life optimally. That's the greatest miracle of the Quran. The wisdom, the depth, the practicality, the solution that is the Quran, the cure, shifa. Alright? And so what Quran al-Hakim? By the wisdom of the Quran, by the wise Quran. Now, Allah took an oath, and I told you the purpose of taking an oath is to leverage credibility. What Quran al-Hakim? What is Allah leveraging the credibility for? إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. That most definitely you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alright? Whenever the pronoun ka, alright? Whenever the pronoun ka, the singular pronoun you, is used in the Quran, it's talking to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Innaka, most definitely you, O Muhammad, لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, are most definitely from amongst those who have been sent with a message. Now I translated that very particularly. And I'll explain to you why I translated it that way. So first and foremost, we understand, I told you, the mushrikun, the Quraysh, and even today in the world, when you present the Quran, a lot of times people have no response. No refutation for the Quran, but then they will criticize the Prophet ﷺ. They will attack the Prophet ﷺ. Alright? Because it makes for an easier target, right? A living, breathing human being, flesh and bones, makes for an easier target. So they will target the Prophet ﷺ, not because there's something wrong with Rasulullah ﷺ, but it just makes for an easier target. As a human being, I can more easily target another human being. So that's what it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leverages the credibility and the authority and the authenticity of the Quran for the authority and the authenticity and the accuracy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَالْقُرْآنِ الْحَكِيمِ إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. You are a messenger, and as proof of that, I swear by the Quran. So based on the credibility of the Quran, we are extending the credibility of the Quran to you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you are in fact a messenger, and never have doubts about that fact. And what's really fascinating is the Prophet ﷺ never doubted. وَالْعَيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ الْعَيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. The Prophet ﷺ, God forbid, he never doubted for a second that he was a messenger of God. But it's talking about the emotional struggle. You can know. The Prophet ﷺ knew in every fiber of his body, in every cell of his existence, he knew that he was a messenger of God. But every day, when Surah Yaseen is being revealed for 9 years, every day, he's got everyone around him, some of the closest people to him, like his own uncle Abu Lahab. He's got everyone around him telling him constantly, non-stop, you are not a prophet, you are not a messenger, you are not a prophet, you are not a messenger. So even though he never stopped believing for a second, but it emotionally was tough, right? To be told no every single day. I mean, what's it like dealing with so much negativity? Ever been around a negative person? Right? It's destructive. You can wake up in the morning all nice and happy and fresh, 6 a.m., pray your Fajr on time, you feel great, you go for a run or a jog, you feel awesome, you take a shower, you have a healthy breakfast, you feel great, you sit down with your email, in an hour you get like 3 hours worth of work done, you feel super awesome. By 8 a.m. you feel like you just conquered the world and you got this smile from year to year, a little jump in your step, you're just like balloons and rainbows and unicorns walking around, right? You feel like $1,000,000, and then you run into your friend who is like Debbie Downer, Mr. Negative, right? And he's like, oh man, it sucks so much. And it's like, oh, this guy. Right? That's it. Your day's over. It might as well be 8 p.m. now. Right? It's just this guy can destroy everything. All energy in the room. Like every time he walks into a room, a bunny rabbit dies somewhere, right? It's this guy's so negative. Imagine dealing with a whole society, a whole community, a whole city full of negative people. How difficult must that have been for the Prophet to keep up his energy? His job is to inspire. And all he has to do is talk to negative people all day long. Very difficult. So Allah is telling the Prophet إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Don't doubt for a second that you are in fact a messenger. Just as true as the Quran is, that's how true your messengerhood is. Your prophethood is. Don't doubt it for a second. إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And that's why there's so much emphasis. Grammatically speaking, there's so much emphasis in it. But now I want to show you a little bit about the accuracy. If it is, this is an emotional consolation. Allah is emotionally comforting the Prophet ﷺ. Let me show you something really fascinating. Number one, Allah did not say, إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولٌ. He didn't say, إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولٌ. He didn't use the word Rasul. He used the word Mursal. A little bit different. Rasul